Hi, Graeme. Welcome to the Vehicle Network podcast. Thanks for coming on. It's great to finally catch up with you because we have met on a couple of occasions, but it seems to be at conferences where one of us is stepping off stage and the other's walking on, and we never really get a chance to catch up. And triage and the digital triage is something that I think is really important for people to get their heads around. So we appreciate you taking time out to speak to us today.
Thank you very much for taking for having me in. Yeah, really appreciate it.
That's great. So I guess for the listeners, could you just give us an introduction to who Graeme Horsman is, his current role, and how he's got to where he's at the moment, just to give people a flavour of where you're coming at Digital Triage from?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Graeme Horsman. I'm a senior lecturer at Cranfield University, and I just joined Cranfield University this year, and I'm a course director for our new MSc in Digital Forensic Investigation, or Digital Forensics as it's titled. So I'm an academic and have been an academic now probably for the best part of just over 10 years. And then as part of that role, obviously, naturally, there's an element of teaching and supervising students that are wanting to come into the field of digital forensics and digital investigations. So over that period of time, I've spent a lot of time developing courses and teaching various different subjects that fit within, I guess, the umbrella concept of digital forensics. So that's wide ranging, mobile, internet, all sorts of different areas that we kind of go within. And a separate sort of branch of my role is research, and essentially it's to kind of pursue those problem areas, challenges, whatever they may be, that exist in this field as well. So ideally, and something that I've tried to do over the years is to look at some of those operational challenges, as well as the sort of the blue sky ones as well, is to look at what are the issues that are being faced by the practitioners, by the individuals like yourself out there, that maybe you just don't have the time to deal with. And then maybe someone like us in an academic environment could actually dedicate a bit of time and try and maybe see if we can develop solutions or answers or just to contribute to the narrative that exists in that space as well. So I guess you can think of the academic role as kind of sliced down the middle. We've got lots of teaching on one side, lots of research on the other. I came into that at sort of about 2010, 11. And prior to that, I guess I was a practitioner doing investigative work that I guess most of you in industry would do now, albeit back then tech was a hell of a lot different to what we're dealing with now.
Yeah, and I think, that is a difficulty for everybody who's trying to keep on top of the tech and the rate at which, technology is changing. And we certainly do have that issue in the automotive industry at the minute with the way things are going in that space for sure. So at Cranfield, then, just give us a little bit of a overview of the facilities that you've got there, then, because am I correct in thinking there was a recent launch for the digital forensic investigation and some facilities that you've got there for people to make use of who are coming to the university?
Yeah, so we are a set of new facilities. We've had some recent investment to launch a brand new MSc in digital forensics. So we have had investment in the generation of a new laboratory, a teaching facility, but also it kind of doubles as a research facility where we have a series of, as you would naturally expect, investigative machines with industry-specific software on there that allows us to not only teach and ensure that those that enrolled on our courses are comfortable with the software they would expect to see in industry when they move out into industry, but also those pieces of software and platforms allow us to then explore certain topics and areas in research that maybe haven't been done so far. So we have a state-of-the-art forensic laboratory, if you wish, that we do our teaching, we do our research in. And separate to that as well, we have what I guess we can call a chip-off lab or a teardown lab. It depends on how you want to phrase it. So we have the facilities to do those more invasive investigations at the hardware level, I guess, which is sort of pull devices apart, remove some chips, do some extraction of data, and then obviously that data we can flip back into our other laboratory and do the interpretation and some of the tools that we have there already. So it's a lovely campus. I'm obviously going to say that because I'm from there, but it's a really, really tip-top facility that has been spec'd out specifically to give everyone that is in there the capability to do sort of the high-end cutting edge research and teaching that we do
Yeah.
there as well. And our degree is a partnership with Cranfield University, and we also have CCL Solutions who are delivering some of the modules and course content on there as well. So we have that industry experience that we're bringing in from, we've got our academics, but we've also got our industry practitioners that are coming in who have done this work, do casework on a daily basis, so they can bring in and contextualize some of the research and some of the work that they're seeing, and really gives that angle from it kind of, you learn your concepts, but then you also see how it's deployed in that real world environment. And I think that provides a really, really sort of a powerful learning experience, I guess, for those that are there doing it, because they're seeing not just how to do something, but actually how it's deployed properly. So it's a nice setup. I think we've got some really, really good facilities in terms of being able to do it, but we've also got some good mechanisms for delivering the content as well.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good point, that you do have industry coming in and giving that insight to what it is like out there in the sort of real world and doing casework, and how it affects the theory and everything else is great in academia. But as we know, we need a balance sometimes of those two if we are to get a head start. Otherwise, it's hard to perhaps pick that up immediately when you're heading out, having completed some study and done a degree. You sometimes find yourself having to learn again when you get out there into industry as well for that. So integrating the two makes perfect sense with regards to that. So the students that would be doing that degree and using those facilities, would they be doing R&D as part of the degree as well, or is there too much to fit into the sort of course content itself for them to be able to do some of the research and development, or do they get involved in that as well?
The world is kind of their oyster, really, and it's you get out of it what you put in. So we'll supply students with opportunities to engage with research projects, to do their own independent research and development. And whilst you will be taught, you taught your modules, you're taught your content, because the core of the MSc or the Masters is obviously to pass and learn certain things within the modules themselves. The students have access to our facilities, which allows them to take topic areas and go and explore themselves, or work with us on projects that we might have ongoing as well, or work with industry that have maybe approached us and said, look, we'd really like to know about A, B, and C. And it might be a case that actually, because we've got the person power, that some of the students want to explore what A, B, and C might be, want to start to try and contribute and tear down and apply some of their skills that we're going to teach them, to try and make a contribution as well. So we encourage, it's not just about coming and being taught, it's about developing yourself independently as well with the research. And every student doesn't just do the taught modules, they do a thesis project, which is a huge piece of individual research with the support of a supervisor, an academic supervisor as well. But ultimately, it's your project that you take over a period of months, and you sort of deep dive into that particular area. So it could be that you've studied some modules and you've picked up on a few themes that you think, that's great, I'd love to know more. And maybe over those months, you've gone into that theme a little bit more in your own time, and it comes to the thesis and you think, right, my job now for this thesis is actually, I'm going to take this topic and I'm going to kind of break it apart, and I'm going to then do some really deep dive research in there and come back with a thesis that might be a solution to a certain artifact and how to interpret it. It could be an application teardown, could be lots of different things. Yeah, we don't just expect, sit in the seat, listen to what we say, walk away with that knowledge. We really want people taking the knowledge, applying it themselves, and looking under the bonnet themselves. And I guess it probably sounds a little bit cheesy, but one of the things that we're really keen on is that we're not trying to make students just drive tools. We're trying to kind of get people to think in an investigative mindset. So what's the problem? How do I interpret it? How do I test and validate it? Or whatever it is, my hypothesis. We don't just want point click output, that's what it says. We're really looking for people to be thinking, right, I've got some skills now that will allow me to break down that problem, to really research it, to really validate, or to test my own understanding of what I think that means. So we're trying to kind of, I guess, build investigators rather than sort of tool drivers. And I appreciate the tool driving is definitely a major part of that. but we want people to understand what that tool might be doing and how to test it and those sorts of things as well. And the research, being able to do that forms a massive part of that, because when there isn't an answer to a problem, you can't just stop and be, well, there's no answer, let's just put that problem down. Someone's got to go and find the answer. You've got to have the skills to do that.
And I think that really does, by having that ingrained in the training and pushing the students in that way, for those that are going into digital forensic investigations or crime investigations in a future career, then it sets them in good stead to have those investigative mindsets and to explore the possibilities of, what will work and what won't work. And it probably stands them in very good stead of having a career in that arena as well, if that makes sense, because the transferable learning skills to other facets of industry, certainly around investigations anyway, for sure.
We want to kind of build it from identifying opportunities that digital investigations and digital items can bring all the way through to the interpretation and the understanding, because it's not just a case of I found this digital trace and this digital trace is this. Actually, we want people to understand how that might plug into a wider inquiry, if you like, and rather than thinking about it in isolation, it's the skill sets to kind of what does that bit bring to the party, and why am I in that chain, that investigative chain, and what is my role, and how does that mindset apply, and how can I kind of help the bigger picture as opposed to just being an isolated cog, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And finally, just before we move on from Cranfield, how much of the students do they get involved in vehicles, or is it just this is a technology, this is computing, and you just apply it to the Internet of Things essentially? And vehicles are a part of the Internet of Things to a degree, albeit there's probably some other technologies and different systems going on there from the automotive network side of things to a degree, but because we're seeing so many changes over that at the minute, the worlds are merging somewhat. But how much emphasis is put on that, or how much interest is there from students asking about vehicles, I guess, from our perspective?
Well, I think from a student perspective, vehicles is still something that is a bit of a surprise for them in terms of what's in them, and I don't think it's just at a student level. I think it's actually it kind of in everyone's level. I think now that we're really starting to appreciate the fact that these things are not just a getaway vehicle or a facilitator of an offence, it's actually the vehicle itself going to record it. I think we're now starting to really appreciate it, but only just starting to appreciate it to that good level. So I think the students, and I'm going to make a generalization here, and I to be proven wrong, but I think a lot of students, if we were to say, look, your car could have all of this data within it, some of them might be surprised or think that it was there, but not really appreciate its presence. So from a course perspective, it's certainly something we need and should and will look to do more on. And I think that just becomes because we can see how big it's going to become because of the ownership of a car and the fact that, now we're looking at these things being everywhere. Kind of a little bit analogous to the mobile phone, isn't it? It's your kind of second piece of kit that most people will have on them or with them or in ownership. So we don't at this moment in time. I mean, I'd love a set of cars that we could just tear down and build up and go through this process, but it's something that we don't actually have right this moment. But I think it's something that going forward, we need to have more understanding and more access to, and something that I think we will look to kind of branch out into. So we keep it, I guess, at this moment in time, quite theoretical and conceptual, and link it into some, as you said, some of the IoT stuff, some of the system-based stuff that you might see. But we don't have a kind of position at this moment in time where we can go and develop an investigative strategy in a car. And I think that's just because it's something I think that we need to maneuver into, and we haven't at this moment in time.
But I think that's testament to how difficult it is for people in the digital arena to try and cover all these bases of what we've got going on in the world at the minute that's digital and that could assist. There is just sometimes too much in there, and you've got to start with a foundation and then move out from there into those specialist roles or specialist areas of interest, I guess, once you've got that initial understanding and foundation of those basic principles. Okay, so digital triage, that's really what I wanted to talk about today. We experience difficulties and spend a lot of time with investigators over triaging vehicles when we're looking at obtaining data from them, and it does create quite a difficult proposition for people. And I know you've done a lot of work around this, so I just wanted you to talk us through a little bit of the work that you've done around digital triage for more traditional devices and digital labs that are up and down the country, because they also have issues around prioritizing work and caseloads over which devices to examine first, for example, or which examines to seize, on a crime scene. And we'll perhaps link that in with some of the work that we have to do, with regards to vehicles and some of the problems that some of our listeners will be facing most days. But I think it's really good to get your insight, having spent some time looking into this and publishing a couple of papers on digital triage that are probably transferable into the vehicle world as well.
Sure. It's a topic area that I've kind of been in and amongst probably for the last two maybe 3 years, and it's stemmed from a number of kind of challenges and conversations that I've had over these periods of time. And I think it's probably the best place to start is that we've had a number of reports published in the recent years that have really emphasized the growth in digital evidence, and the fact that one of the figures that I see quite often is around 90% of cases now have a digital element in them. So whenever we're attending scenes, first responders, whoever it may be, it's almost like digital has to be one of the priority things that have to be on your mind when you attend an incident or attend an inquiry, because it's more than likely going to be there in the majority of cases, whereas your other traditional trace evidence types might be a little bit rarer, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I think having an understanding of it is something that's been pushed up the priority, and the need to have that in the back of the mind. Now, the fact that it's not just present, it's also in an abundance, and in the fact that you attend a dwelling or wherever it might be, it's not just going to be a single device type. Everyone's probably got a mobile phone in their pocket. Everyone's probably got an IoT device or something in that household, and I'm describing things that everyone would know that they have in their house. It's going to be a hive of activity from a digital perspective. Now, traditionally, maybe we still have this attitude, and this is the challenge. I think we know we don't have the resources, I think, to tackle everything. I think that's something that most people will agree on. We can't just do everything all at once. We're going to create delays. We've got the case backlogs that we've talked about for a long, long time. But also now on the agenda is that we're realizing that actually by taking that seize everything approach and dealing with everything or trying to do it, we're not just causing delays, but we're also stepping on the privacy element of things. And we're also potentially causing ourselves issues by taking things we don't need, but we might not know we need them at the time, or know we don't need them. So it's a really interesting topic. I think it's a big space for work and a big space for improvement. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way, like in the sense of, oh, we're not doing a very good job at the moment or anything like that. I'm not saying that, because I realize it's very, very difficult and so complex to deal with. But I think there is room to have an evaluation of the strategic thinking we do with scenes, to really try and be evaluative of, right, we're here. The first challenge is, where are the investigative opportunities that we have on this scene? And then the second kind of branch to that question is, do we need them? And I think it's a deceptively simple question, because I think when you weigh up risk, and if you're not very confident with technology, I think that the default position is, I don't know what that might do, but I think we should have it. And then before we know it, we start walking out of scenes with lots and lots of devices. And I'm talking a long time ago now, because obviously I said I haven't been in a practitioner over a while, but I've seen things that have been seized that I would question, well, why have I got that? And that was the best part of 15 years ago. So I don't think that's changed. I think what we have now is even more wider range and weird things that we see in the house, that unless you're a tech expert or someone that's really got their eye on the tech game, you might look at certain things like your Google Home Hubs or whatever and think, well, what is that? Maybe I should have that. So triage and that triage decision making is huge, because it doesn't just impact it impacts the whole investigative chain, because you don't take something, well, your inquiry might stop or fall over later on. You do take something, and you might find out that actually it's had repercussions and implications on the person you've took it from, and you for taking it, and you may not be able to do anything with it further down the line, or there's things that you need to kind of have a little bit of a structured decision. So my work, to kind of summarize it then, is I've tried to focus on the decision-making element of triage, because I realize that it's too big of a challenge to sort of train someone in every piece of tech that exists, because I don't think any of us will ever know. And the minute you do get trained, you're out of date because something else comes out.
Absolutely.
But I think what we could do is maybe think strategically about a set of questions or stages that we can then they can apply to everything, and at least justify and be a bit more evaluative and transparently sort of say, well, I've done this because my mindset and decision making looks like this.
Yeah.
And it might lead to be something down the line that is wrong, but at least we understand why we've got there, and it hasn't just been a case of, it's got a plug on it, I think we should take it. It's about, I guess, trying to be and strengthen your decision making, and so that if anyone evaluates it and queries it, you can stand up and say, look, yeah, the investigative outcome maybe wasn't what we wanted it to be, but we didn't know this at the time about this device, but you'll understand why we've got to this position, because my mindset is this, and this.
Yeah. Yes.
So yeah, it's the decision-making element that I think we can make an impact on, because we can try and encourage people to be a bit more deep dive in the way that they approach their decisions.
Yeah. And it's perhaps a role I would not really relish at the moment, is being that decision maker of an investigator at a crime scene, of having to decide what I am going to take away and what I'm going to leave. And I think, there'll be a massive mentality from some of my former colleagues and current colleagues to a degree, on serious crime investigations. They'll absolutely seize everything in the fear of, missing something. And if we've got it, then we can look at it in the fullness of time. But I think we are getting to the stage whereby those decision makers need to be a little bit more brave and a little bit more realistic over what we can do, because, as you point out, it's all right saying, let's take everything with a plug on it from, a crime scene. But you've then got to have the resources to be able to carry out those examinations. If you don't carry out those examinations and exhibits and items and digital artifacts are still within unused material, shall we say, that then comes through on a disclosure schedule to a defendant, then questions might be asked as to why you've not examined those digital devices, which then can cause problems down the line. So it does become a very complex area, because on the flip side of that, if I don't take things and I don't prove my case later down the line, and especially if it's high profile, that people are under immense pressure for investigations that have not gone to plan or have not gone how people perceive them to be. And I think the other valid point that you make out of all that is the decision-making process, and perhaps the records that people would be making at that time with the information that they've got at that time, which is something that we used to do regular way around just investigative decisions as to whether you were going to go and speak to a witness or not that's potentially been identified as being at the scene. And I guess a lot of those types of decisions and policy decisions will have to be made in the digital world on the back of some sort of guidance from somebody with an investigative role that has a little bit of an idea over those devices. And I guess the work that you do gives some type of framework for people to work from if they are coming into these roles from either because they're new to tech, if you like, and they've been put into that environment and they're having to get used to it, or if they're with tech but going into those investigative roles and need to be confident in giving other people advice because they're the ones with the technical knowledge, I guess.
Yeah, lots of really important points. I think the first one is I feel quite guilty sometimes talking about it, because I sometimes suggest some of these things from behind an academic desk, and I'm not the one that's at the scene. And I appreciate that, me saying some of these concepts, it's really, really difficult to deploy them under the pressure of everything that exists in that inquiry, in that environment. So I always like to make it clear that, my suggestions and my ideas and themes here, I really appreciate that I'm not the one doing it. And as you said at the start, I don't envy those people that are in that position. But I guess the angle that we're coming from here is to just try and provide some support around that decision process. I do think if we be braver, it's a good way that you put it. It helps everybody if being braver can be done accurately and effectively, because ultimately you're being more targeted. You're protecting from a privacy perspective. You're not encroaching too far in that respect, but you're also hopefully lifting out the exhibits and the data from an inquiry that really is the one and stuff that you want, so that you're also being more effective with your resources as well. We put together 3 frameworks really, and they kind of blend and overlap with each other. And it started with putting together a framework around the idea that if you walk into a scene and there's 10 items in there, which items would you or could you or should you justifiably take? And it kind of has that overarching mentality of there might be a chance that you would leave something at the scene. So we put together a framework for that. Now, having had some discussions, we also followed this up with a framework that takes into account that you might want to take everything, but it should also be you should do that in a way that also kind of helps to justify why the investigator or forensic technician or whoever it is might pick those exhibits up, and understand the priority that you might have internally placed on those exhibits based on a number of different factors, which I'm happy to kind of highlight some of those challenges. And as a third and final, we put together a kind of decision model around actually assessing whether your reasonable line of inquiry that you might want to pursue, or should I say your line of inquiry that you want to pursue, if it involves a digital device, is it reasonable? Because ultimately that's the thing that governs a lot of the things that, well, if not all of the legality that we do in terms of our inquiry, we're judged based on, is it reasonable? Because if it's not reasonable, the chances are it's not a legal inquiry or lawful inquiry. So there are lots of things to take into consideration there. And if you're happy for me to do so, I tell you what, I'll whiz through some of those questions and some of those points that I think really are the core things that I would have encouraged people to think about when it comes to trying to help that decision-making process.
Yeah, for sure. Just before you do, the word reasonable, that's the driver for a lot of investigations coming on the back of Criminal Procedure Investigation Act back in 1996. But that is always the sticking point for people as to whether or not it's reasonable. And I think it's so difficult to understand what is reasonable in the circumstances that you are in, and somebody somewhere along the line has to make that decision as to what is reasonable and what isn't reasonable with the information that they've got at that time, and it often gets judged in hindsight when people have known other information has come to light. And I think, if anything, I really want to emphasize that point, is for people to be making those decisions that are reasonable in the circumstances as they are at the time that they find themselves in those particular positions. And I'm hopeful that the points that you are going to draw out next might assist people in being able to make those reasonable decisions as to whether or not it is right for them to seize an item or go forward with the investigation on the digital side of things.
So you're right. It's really difficult in terms of there's not a lot of formalized guidance, and for an obvious reason. In some senses, we'd have to have guidance for every single scenario, and we've got a potentially unlimited scenario here of things that can arise. So we don't have the manual of reasonable lines of inquiry that we can flip to and sort of give ourselves some indication of this. So what's happened, or what it seems to be the case, is that we're obviously going to make ad hoc decisions at an individual based level, or we might find ourselves in that position. And it's that, I'm not saying that's right or wrong or anything like that, but what we maybe could do is try and formalize some themes that would help to justify our reasonableness or to evidence that it is a reasonable pursuit that we've undertaken here.
Yeah.
And I think the other side of this as well is, I think by taking an approach like this, is that we can help to identify when we're not being reasonable quicker, as opposed to looking at it down the line and thinking, you know what, that wasn't reasonable. I think the idea is to try and, yes, consolidate a reasonable line of inquiry, but also to try and cut out those non-reasonable ones earlier, or to stop them from being pursued, so that we don't go down those avenues. And it's really, really tricky. And it starts with kind of some very basic fundamental elements to kind of the decision process, and it kind of then goes on to some of the more complex ones. And you kind of highlighted it there as well, in the sense that this can and should necessarily be a collaborative decision-making process. So, for example, if I was at the scene and I was trying to make a triage decision based on a vehicle, well, I don't consider myself to be a vehicle expert by any stretch of the imagination. I'd like to think that I could turn to someone in my team like yourself, or whoever it would be, with the knowledge to say, look, my thoughts about going down this line are X, Y, and Z, but I really need some input to shore up that decision to make sure that it's reasonable. So I think this has to be a collaborative, supported decision. I think, we don't want to just have all the pressure based on individuals, because we all have varying levels of knowledge, we all have various levels of training, and it's not fair to expect the same outcome from everybody if we're all having to act in little silos here. So I think input from everyone would be useful, and obviously improve that decision process.
Absolutely. And linking into that, we receive inquiries quite often for vehicle system forensics inquiries, and a lot of people are relying on us to say whether or not it is reasonable to pursue the vehicle for that particular offence. We don't necessarily get the information about the offence, but what we can do is say what is possible with that vehicle and how much work would be involved to get that data, and then it's back onto those toes of the investigators to make that decision. But there is some collaboration there, and I'm sure certainly within other organisations there will be people reaching out to those experts in the respective fields of the digital devices as to knowing whether or not it may or may not be reasonable. And it does need to be a collective, a collective and collaborative approach in order to perhaps get it right, unless you happen to have that individual that has both the knowledge and is in that position as well around that, and they can ask themselves what they would do in that scenario, so to speak. But one of the important things that we sometimes do is we give people the information to say why they shouldn't examine the vehicle, and give them the support that they're not going to get their come under criticism later on down the line, because we will write it up into a policy document to say, listen, you've asked us this, but we're not going to do it. And it is realistic to do that, and I think people should be not afraid not to do something rather than just do it for the sake of doing it, because we still do see them cases of saying, well, I still want to do it. And I can understand why some people still want to do it, because they know what's there and they're dealing with it. But there perhaps needs to be a little bit more confidence around not doing certain things. And I guess with the amount and number of digital devices, people should get more comfortable with not doing it versus why they are doing it, just for it's ticking a box and it's done.
Yeah, I think that's such a difficult thing to do. I do think we need to do it, but I think we need to, as you said there, become more comfortable with omitting to do something, deliberately, sort of being able to say, I'm not going to do this because actually the outcomes that I'd achieve aren't going to add any value to the investigation or inquiry that we're undertaking. And that might be, it could actually be for, I guess, that you'd only establish information you already knew and you didn't need to confirm it maybe. But I imagine in most cases when it comes to vehicles, it's a case of capability. You want something that the vehicle doesn't retain. And therefore, you're essentially going to waste resources, time, effort, money by finding out something that you probably already, well, you could have already established by asking a question at the start.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It's it is a difficult thing, and again, it comes back to the starting point is I don't envy the decision makers and the deployment of these sorts of things at scene.
No. So are we? Have you whistled through those points? Forgive me, or have you kind of gone off track a little bit there, or are you still got some points lined up for our listeners to help out a little bit?
So I'll run through a couple because I think and I'm going to just change tabs on my browser, so I think everything should still be all right. Let me know if it's not, but I've got them wrote down here. Just to kind of give an indication. I think in terms of the reasonable line of inquiry, because this does play the triage and it kind of helps you understand the reasonableness and obviously what you need to be doing here. But I think if we think the fundamental elements of kind of deploying this is we need to understand the core offense that we're investigating. I think is really important. But from an understanding of the core offense, we also need to understand the specific actions, and I'll call them specific actions that we're really interested in that would be relating to this offense. So, to commit this offense, you need to have done X, Y, and Z. And it's those X, Y, and Z actions that we're really interested in. And I think the first thing, and I'll try and relate this to vehicles, but obviously not being a vehicle expert here, is that we really need to understand, do we understand the actions that we're looking for? Because if we're not, we're just going speculatively looking around the place, hoping that we stumble upon something that that somehow we decide that's going to be relevant to us. And I think what we end up doing there is we start doing an unsupported inquiry. We start looking for things we're not sure what we're looking for and why we're looking for. So we're just kind of like fishing around, I guess, in informal terms. So I think the first thing is we need to understand the offence, what constitutes the offence, and what acts might describe that offence that we're looking for. Because then I think we need to basically look at, right, are those actions going to be, is it justifiable that we go looking for them? So again, here it's about looking at those specific actions and think, right, well, if we don't go looking for them, then we don't further our inquiry. We don't understand what that person might have done within that particular scenario. And I think then we have to look at digital evidence and think, well, what is it going to do for us? Are we looking for attribution? Are we just looking to determine whether the device has done something or the car has done something? Are we trying to determine the user of the car has done something? Or are we just trying to determine there's data in that car of a certain type? Or are we even determining whether that device or car is capable of something? Which for a vehicle, I imagine, it's going to be about driving from a capability perspective. But some devices you will see in a household and think, well, what's that capable of? And therefore, you might justify a seizure and interrogation of it because we need to assess capability, and it might have an important impact on it. Obviously, there's an element of belief in this as well, and I won't go into too much about the reason behind this, but I think we need to have some form of objective basis to have a belief that something has gone on this device, that we need it. So we really need to kind of step away from those speculative inquiries and start to think, well, I've got some objective reasoning behind the fact that I think this device over here is involved and has our special activities on there that we think would help our inquiry. So we need to kind of start to build from the floor up here that this device is going to add value to our inquiry, and these are the objectively evidenceable reasons for that. And then I think once we move to that, we move into what I consider the trio of technical questions here, and it's kind of what you were saying before. I think the first thing that we need to think is it technically possible to carry out those actions that we think are going to be relevant to our inquiry? And then we need to think, well, if it is technically possible to carry out those actions, will those actions have left a digital trace? Because not everything might leave a digital trace that we can acquire and capture. Some might be non-resident, whatever that might be. So it's not just, you can do it on that device, but that device has to have some element of retention to have value for us to be able to, to justify seizure and an examination of it. And then the final question is, I've kind of just answered it there, is if we can do something on it and it does leave a trace, is the trace going to be there when we get our hands on that device? Or is the trace in a non-resident form or whatever that might be? It's essentially, we want to be able to do something on the device, it leaves a trace, and we can get that trace and interpret it. It sounds quite simple when you look at it in that direction, but you always have to think, that trace might not be kept, that trace might be gone by the time I get there, or whatever it might be. And that trio of questions is really difficult for first responders who haven't had any training. And that's where it comes down to the fact that I think you need to sort of look and branch out into your wider investigative team and look for the expertise that exists that you can call upon to say, look, I've got device A. Can someone give me a rundown of the capability here? Because I think I want, or I have evidence, or I have a belief in it for this particular reason. But if it doesn't align with the technical capability of the device, well, I would consider what you end up with is a flawed inquiry. You end up trying to interpret a device, and you kind of alluded to this before, is you don't want to be interpreting or interrogating a device that ultimately you're not going to find what you want because it doesn't do it, or it doesn't retain it. And what you've done is, as we've said, you've wasted resources, time, and all of those sorts of things. And as you said there, you know, some of the things that you do is about telling people not to do something as opposed to when to do something, because it gives them the confidence to know that by leaving that device, they haven't lost anything. That's a really big thing, because it really helps us manage the resources better.
Yeah.
And I mean, you know, if you get to this point and you're still going and you're still getting positive answers for these questions, then I think it comes down to proportionality, legitimacy, and necessity here. You know, is by doing this inquiry and triaging this device, is by taking it, is it going to give us more than what we have now? And is there going to be a real risk that by not doing it, we're going to risk the quality of our inquiry or the outcome of our inquiry by not getting this data and understanding it? You know, is it going to be something that's going to be fundamental? And ultimately, you know, have we got a legal right to do it? You know, have we got the backing, if you like? You know, are we allowed to do this? And by being allowed to do it, is it also proportionate that we do it? You know, let's take into account what we see around us and think, well, we're going to create damage potentially by taking this item. And yes, we may still have justifiable reasons for it, but actually we just need to stop a minute and evaluate it and think, yeah, well, let's be a little bit more critical on whether we need it. And it could still be the case that we do. But I think if we're evidencing that we've got a belief, we've got an understanding of the offence, we've got technical capabilities ticked off, so we know that there's a possibility, then, and a realistic possibility it should be there. We've got our legal powers, we think it's proportionate, we think it's necessary, and we can give evidence for all these elements of triage in this device.
Yeah.
I think it's a lot better to be able to evidence that later on down the line than possibly just say, well, I wasn't sure what this thing was, so I think we took it because we were worried that if we didn't, there'd be a risk.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So that structured elements of it is where I've kind of been dabbling around in to see if we can give a little bit more support, help, just kind of a little bit of a lead in to help try and make our decisions a bit more formal, a bit more transparent, a bit more repeatable, but also to be able to have all of this evidence wrote down so we can learn from it. Because if we make a bad decision, which I think inevitably we will, we cannot make good decisions all of the time.
No.
If we've got a record of it, we can learn from it and why we've ended up in that decision state. We're just making ad hoc decisions that have no chain of evidence, chain of kind of continuity as to why we got there. We don't know if we're going to end up there again because we don't know why we did in the first place.
Yeah.
Does that kind of make sense? So I guess that was a kind of hopefully a reasonable overview of these decisions. But you know, as part of that, people have to take into consideration capability. Really difficult, but you have to make a capability assessment. You have to be looking at ownership if you can determine it. You have to be thinking about resources. You know, if I was to seize a Ferrari tomorrow, I don't know here, but can we realistically investigate that? Or is it just going to sit somewhere and then ultimately we're not going to get any further forward here? Do we have the time, the expertise, the resources to be able to really do that? You know, are there repercussions for us by taking it? Because as soon as we take it, you know, the legality, the privacy, all of those repercussions that exist in there. So I've just tried to formulate some frameworks that just, if anything, just make people think about those things. And it could just be a 30-second, I thought about that, tick, I'm good. But I think I've just hopefully tried to put something together that makes that thought process take place, and just as a reminder and a structure.
No, there are excellent points, and for people that are listening to this podcast who are purely in, say, the vehicle system forensics environment, I think that will have been a real eye opener and a real insight, really, if they've not been in a digital investigation in other areas of mobile devices and computers, because everything that you've said there is really transferable onto the vehicle. And the vehicle presents a bigger problem, I think, than the majority of devices that are seized with regards to legalities, inconveniences, backlashes of people wanting these things back sooner rather than later. We're talking perhaps upwards of 40,000-50,000 pounds worth of equipment, not just £1,000 iPhone, which it is an expensive commodity for people not to have. And I understand some people can't function without a phone and they need a phone, but if they're that desperate and the police have recovered it from them, then they can quickly get another SIM card, another handset, and become functional straight away. People that have vehicles seized off them can't become that functional straight away, and there's going to be some real careful decision making having to be done by those people as to whether or not they are A, seizing the vehicle in the first place, B, retaining it, and C, using it in evidence going forward at some sort of trial that you might want to record and retain it for the fullness of an investigation. And they're going to have to start thinking really difficult, and all the things that you say, Graeme, really do emphasize those points. If you're seizing a vehicle, what data are you after? Have you got the tools to get that data off in the first instance? Or is it just a case of, like you say, oh, well, I've seized it just in case because I know cars have got data on them, and I don't know how I'm going to get the data off, but we'll work it out one way or another. Weeks are ticking by and vehicles are ramping up storage. Vehicles take up space in storage areas. That comes at a cost as well. And people do need to get a handle on their digital triage for vehicles that some of our audience are dealing with, so that they can make the right informed decisions. And I know some of our audience will be those go-to people within their organizations that others are relying on, that we've talked about already. So I think what you have is a really good framework, and that people can tap into and say, actually, this is nothing new, because we've been doing it and we've got these problems already in the digital device world, phones and computers, or Internet of Things. But when people are starting to recognize the vehicle as a digital device as well, the same principles apply with regards to that. And I know there's been a lot of work that's gone on as well, just sort of shooting off on a little bit of a tangent here, but victims of crime, when people are recovering phones in, say, sexual offences, for which victims of crimes are expected to hand their handsets over. We know the sort of stories that have gone on in the press with regards to holding on to devices, and similar things will apply in those circumstances. People are going to be looking at vehicles in a similar vein, in the sense that victims of crime, their vehicles could hold data that could answer those questions. And without getting too far off the beaten path, but the legality and the frameworks in place for being able to examine that in the first place, and the amount of data that you could potentially pull out of a victim's vehicle, and only the relevant data for the crime, etc., etc. They are really big problems, and that was really the main focus of bringing you onto this podcast, to tap into your experience and research that you've done in that arena, because I think it does transfer really well. And I do hope that the listeners are picking up on this when they are looking at some of the problems that are presented for vehicle system forensics examinations.
Sure, I wholeheartedly agree. I think if you take someone's vehicle away from them, how are they going to get out and about? That could be their independence that's been removed from them. How do you take your children to school if they live a long way? All of the sorts of things that we think about it with a mobile phone. What if they need it for communication? What if it's a core element of the device? Like you said, you're not going to go out and buy a new car or get a new car, are you, while that inquiry is ongoing? And so, yeah, I think there's a lot to think about, and they are bigger mobile phones that have massive impact on our lives. I think we've got a lot to think about, but we have a chance to think about it now.
Yeah.
If we get it right, we don't necessarily have to be 5-6 years into smart cars and find that we're only just trying to work out how we manage it. We could make these prioritization decisions now and then commit to them as we start to see that, these things becoming, well, they are more mainstream now in terms of how you deal with them. You're seeing them in a lot of cases. And I imagine that's only going to grow.
It will. And there are people who are sort of I would imagine across certainly the UK and maybe further afield that are, scrambling to have some of these processes in place, at the moment, and have kind of got halfway there with it. And if I can give anything back to people that are listening on a vehicle front, you tend to find, and I don't know whether this would be replicated in what you see with digital devices, Graeme, but there's probably 3 or 4 categories that they might fall into. I know that vehicle stores that data. I know I've got a tool that can pull it out, and I know that will assist the investigation, and it's a green light, and we're on a goer. I've got another scenario whereby, well, sometimes that data's there. It's not always there, but it could be, and we've got a solution to do it. Probably this is where we're getting into a little bit of triaging. To the third scenario whereby we know that data might be there, but I'm just not sure how to get it, and there might be some protracted investigations to be done. To the fourth stage whereby we've never seen this before and we don't know what tools might work and what may not work. And I think that they tend to sort of fall into those 4 categories for me, to the vehicles, when we see them. And sometimes you're immediately down that green light route. Not to say that it goes back to what you were talking about, the offence. If that's not going to prove the offence, then why are we doing it when there could be other investigations that would solve that crime, and we just don't do it for doing its sake? Versus the other end of the spectrum, whereby we've got a car that we don't know what's on there, and why are we doing it other than to satisfy our needs that we've ticked a box or we've done it, and why can we not just spend a little bit more time being, shall we say, a little bit braver over not doing it? Notwithstanding the fact that there will be so many other facets going on in a serious crime investigation that needs to be managed by a senior investigating officer that would have some weight or bearing onto those decisions on digital devices as to where you do them. There's certainly those cases whereby we've absolutely got nothing to go on here in the car, or even though we don't know what we're going to get from it, we're going to go down that route. That's what I would try to impress on some of the listeners, is that from my experience to dealing with cars and triaging them, you tend to find they fall into those sort of 3 to 4 categories, really.
Yeah, I can imagine that being the case. I think one of the overarching elements essentially is just having that, I guess, that understanding of, is that data going to really further my inquiry or consolidate my inquiry or have a tangible benefit to my understanding of trying to establish what's gone on? And does it exist in this car alone? Or is there other sources of it? Or, is there a real need, I guess, that this vehicle is going to make this contribution?
Yeah.
And then obviously you've got to take into consideration all the other elements that we've chatted about as well.
Yeah. And the other thing quickly to mention is, because the vehicle is it is one element, but it interfaces with other digital elements of our lives, such as our phones that are being integrated into our vehicles to a degree. So we've got this seamless shift of our portable device, into the vehicle and what's been going on there. That sparks off investigations, and with other things that the vehicle is talking to off the vehicle, that again branches out into another strategy on another digital element of the investigation, really. It does require some careful thinking about as a vehicle when you start looking at what capabilities certain vehicles have got and what implications that can have in the other digital areas of investigation. Okay, where could people find some of the research that you've done? Is it published anywhere, or how would they be able to tap into some of that if they wanted to learn a little bit more about it?
So a lot of the work we do, we look to publish and try and make it open access if we can. So, or I guess probably the easiest way would be to maybe reach out and contact me, and I can provide you with the information that you might be interested in, and you can either capture or contact me via Cranfield if you dropped into the Cranfield website and a quick Google on there, or on LinkedIn. Any of those platforms, if you make a connection, and if you're interested in various different elements of this, I'm more than happy to share the information with you. And if you want to chat about it,
I'll drop some general contact details in the lesson that this podcast is going in. And if people want to follow up with Graeme, then by all means reach out to him. So to wrap up, we always finish with a number of questions just to finish off our podcasts. I'm just going to rattle through these now. What do you wish you knew before you started in your industry? Your hindsight could be the listener's foresight.
To question things more. I think I wish I knew not to just accept things when they come to me or on face value. I guess to be more inquisitive, investigative, whichever one you want to kind of term it. But I think I just wish I was a little bit more. Need to evaluate that a little bit more.
I would certainly echo that. And assume nothing, believe nobody, check everything. Is a motto that is often used in investigation. But very good point. Can you give us an experience when you failed, and how did you overcome it?
All the time. Literally all the time. I mean, every time you're undertaking research, you form your interrogations, your hypothesis, and you fail all the time on it. You literally go round in circles. You have to step away from it. You have to just walk away and walk the dog for an hour. And I think sometimes that clears the mind and allows you to come back to it. So in terms of failure, I think you encounter it all of the time when you're trying to establish how new things work. And it's just a case of getting stuck in and stick at it.
And I don't think anybody has to be afraid of failure. You've got to be failing to be learning, as they say, and you just become comfortable with it as you keep on doing it. And I think you probably make a good point in respect to going away from something. I'm as guilty as the next person for probably sitting and looking at a problem for too long and need to move away from it and come back with a fresh pair of eyes, or even a phone call to somebody else and just say, listen, what do you think about this one? Have you got a recommended resource that our listeners could go to?
Do you know what? These all sound like get out of jail answers here, but my advice would be to just everything. You should look at everything. If you're on a social media platform, even if you're just a passive social media, keep an eye out. There are some class blogs that pop up. There are some little articles. There are little isolated pieces of research that pop up everywhere. Make sure you just observe them. Even if you don't read them there and then, bookmark them, go back. I don't think there is now any single resource that is the best things in sliced bread. I think collectively there are bits everywhere.
Other than the Vehicle Network, of course. No, it's a really valid point, and I'm doing that all the time. I find stuff all the time. I just end up. I've got a stream of messages to myself, from links that I just find online and send, and then come back to at some point. It's the world is just full of information that's out there, and just grab it while you can. Are there any myths in your industry that you wish to debug? I
thought about this, and I to be honest, I struggle to really come back with one. But in the back of my mind, I'm sort of thinking and I'm not sure if this is a myth, but the tool is going to do it for you. I'm going to just use the tool. The tool will be fine. I'll get the information and off I go. I think maybe we really need to. Is it a myth? I'm not sure if it is a myth, but what I would say is that, I think you need more than that. The tool is going to help, but it's not going to do the whole thing.
Great stuff. If you're in my shoes, what question would you have asked yourself that I didn't?
I honestly, I have nothing for this question. I couldn't think of anything. So I don't know. I think you've asked everything I would have asked.
Okay. Thank you. Finally, we're going to put a playlist together. What is your favorite driving track?
Sweet Child of Mine.
Sorry?
Sweet Child of Mine.
Sweet Child of Mine.
Yeah, what a tune.
We'll get that. We'll get that in the playlist as it starts to build with the guests that have been on there. All right, Graeme. Well, we're just coming up to the hour mark, so we really appreciate your time this afternoon. And for those people listening, we hope you found that really insightful. If you do want to reach out and contact Graeme, then again, we will put contact details within the lesson. And yeah, by all means, reach out, and we hope you found this input useful.
Thank you very much for having me.
No problem. You're welcome.